Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello there, podcast listeners. It's Kathy Mazak, and I have a great interview for you today. I get into the nitty-gritty of desk rejection with science writing expert and academic writing coach, Anna Clemens. You're really going to enjoy hearing about the way that Anna kind of describes the things you should be paying attention to, specifically in your science-based articles, so that you don't get a desk reject. And we talk about writing process and what you need to do to really get over, one of the biggest reasons that people procrastinate writing up their data, which is that they don't know where to start. And I'll just give you a spoiler alert. Having a process is the answer. So make sure you check out all the links in the show notes and enjoy this conversation with science writing coach Anna Clemens. Yay! Okay, so I'm here with our special guest today, Anna Clemens, and we are talking all about science writing. So Anna, I would love for you to kind of just introduce yourself a little bit more to our audience by telling us how you got started and particularly interested in science writing.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And hello, everyone. My name is Anna Clemens, and I am an academic writing coach, just as Kathy, but with a different focus, one could say.
Yeah.
I have a background in chemistry. So I did my PhD in chemistry. And then while I was it kind of developed early in my PhD, because I did my PhD in Sweden, where you have to write what's called a licentiate thesis. So it's like a mini PhD thesis. And truth to be told, I didn't have the easiest time at my PhD. There was a lot of stuff going on, as it is, I know, for many people. Yeah. What happened though was I got to write this thesis, and I was like, oh my God, I'm loving this. Suddenly everything felt so much better. And it's I don't know, I really developed this love of writing. And there was a few things I really, really still to this day really like about writing. And that is actually two main things, I guess. One is those flow state that you can get in so easily when you write. And the other thing is that I feel and this was just contrasting my research so much, whereas the collecting the data and stuff that was so time consuming. And you would often spend weeks and weeks and weeks in the lab. And then you had to throw away the data because something happened, or because, I don't know, or you wouldn't never use it because it turned out that it didn't make sense. And it was just the process was so, I don't know, frustrating to me. And then when I got to write, it was oh, wow, you sit there and write. And then at the end of the day, you see, oh, I have written a page or whatever. I finished this chapter of my thesis and it's done. Not done, but you produce something and it's there, and it's going to you will work with that. And that was such a nice feeling. Mm-hmm. This accomplished that you actually accomplished something. And that's, I think, when it started. And I really I also love writing articles and my PhD thesis as well. I don't know, I loved it. And I also saw that my colleagues didn't love it. There was I immediately saw there was this disconnect or that this is weird in a way. I like it.
Yeah.
And that made me think that maybe there's something in there that I could harness.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Right. I mean, depending on the kind of science you do, but most science, it's so out of your control. Right. Like I remember my husband, and I remember like me, like a little English major, not understanding that experiments sometimes don't work. And I'm like, what do you mean they don't work? I thought you just like got different, like not the results you were expecting. It's like, no, the procedures just don't work. And it costs a lot of money to do them. And I got to do it again. And it was a lot of time. And it was like maybe a year before like Guillermo got his Western blot to work, And it was like so much time. So I can appreciate like the kind of control a little bit that you have over writing, especially if you're a person that can get into the flow state and like you have an affinity for writing anyway. So now you're teaching academics about science writing. So how did you kind of come to that? You were hinting that like you noticed that maybe you're not, it's a little unusual to maybe love the writing part so much. So how did you kind of come to start teaching people about it?
It really developed. So after my PhD, I started freelancing and I would write sort of as a freelancer, would take basically any gig where I could write about science. And that was both. So I already started pretty early on to help other scientists to write their papers, like give them like review their stuff, edit their papers, stuff like that. And I also started writing for like actual like popular science publications.
Yeah.
And I did an internship with the German edition of Scientific American. And that was really, really helpful to understand a little bit more like about the differences to like writing for like a wider audience.
Yeah.
Or to like more a lay audience. And that was also really helpful just to realize, I mean, we can talk about this later, but I think it's a really, really good practice for everyone, actually. I mean, for every scientist or researcher to do that, because you just learn a few skills that are really helpful also, I think, when you write papers, because in the end, we are always communicating to non-experts. I mean, we are communicating to readers and they're usually in our field or kind of near our field, but in the end, nobody knows your research as well as you do. And I think it's just really, really useful to understand how you can break things down to a level that others can actually understand it. And yeah, so I did that for a while and freelance basically for those journals and these publications, like no journals, magazines, I should say, not scientific journals. And then I started my own business and started helping researchers more like one-to-one. And that then developed into me teaching researchers. So now I have an online course and also teach workshops.
So I think like part of the value of talking to people who are one step out of academia about writing is that like, so you get to see lots of people's writing, right? Like, and you get to work with lots of different writers. So I would love to talk a little bit about something that really gets, when Anna and I were brainstorming this podcast, we were like, let's talk about desk rejection because like, let's really like get into some of this, like the nitty gritty stuff that makes us scared as writers, that holds us back from getting more publications out. And we thought that you, our dear audience, would love to hear about, that frustration that I think a lot of, especially like early career, first time submissions get desk rejects. It happens to everybody. But what do you think is like the main reason for desk rejects? And can you give our audience like maybe a little bit of a thought about how to think about them and what your approach should be if you've been trying to publish and you keep getting desk rejects?
Yeah, desk rejection really is normal.
Yeah.
I mean, it does hurt, especially when it's like the first time or when you were really excited about a certain journal, but it really is normal. It's kind of part of the process. And I think the difficult thing about it is that when you get desk rejected, which means no peer reviewer, like you don't get the like review from the peer reviewer. So you don't have like anything to go on. Like,
Yeah. Like, why?
usually the editors send often like they send like these canned, or they sound very canned, like email responses, like, and they don't really say much in those. So then, yeah, of course you're like, okay, why exactly did this happen? And what shall I do to like, shall I just submit this as it is? Or shall I do something? Shall I revise the abstract or whatever before I submit it somewhere else? And I think, so there are, I think, broadly speaking, two main reasons why typically work gets desk rejected. The first one is that it really is the data itself, and the other one is the writing. So in terms of the data, generally speaking, what journal editors look for, they want to understand, is this work a good fit for my journal?
Right.
And is this work that is like needed now? You know, like, is there something that the world needs, or the scientific community, like that specific scientific community that you will speak to, do they need to know this? And do they need to know this now?
Yeah.
So this is what the journal editor is trying to assess. They're not even really trying to assess how sound your research is, because they won't necessarily know, because they will cover like a few different research topics or fields. So depending on what journal you submit to, they may be quite broad, actually. So that's not their expertise, and that's not their job. So that's why they send it to peer reviewers. So they will still, though, in terms of the data, kind of look at, do they think like overall it makes sense? Like, they're really trying to understand like the story, right? Like, does that make sense? Then they are looking at like data presentation, like to understand your results. I think a journal editor typically, and that depends on the person, like I've spoken to several and they have a little bit different approaches in terms of what they read and how much time they spent on it. But I think generally speaking, the like higher the impact factor, I mean, or if you look at like acceptance rates, like I think you can already see, and you can get like kind of a feeling for how many articles does that journal editor receive, and then can kind of deduct from there how much time do they have for each article they receive. Like you can kind of do the maths, and then maybe someone at Nature, for example, just doesn't have so much time to like read every sentence of your paper. Right. And in those instances, especially, they'll look at your figures when it comes to your data. So that's the one thing. So the figures, I think, a little bit underestimate, or authors often underestimate how important the figures are, or tables. But figures, if you have figures, they really need to be like really good quality. And then, of course, apart from the data, so yeah, there's the writing part where like maybe your study, like maybe your data is like, you have like a really big study, like where you tested everything. It's really like sound and solid. It's novel. Like nobody has ever done this. It's really timely. Like it's really like relevant now. And also it's like really significant. Like the potential like impact of the work is huge. But then of course you need to show that like in your writing, you need to communicate that. And that, I think, I don't know if one can say most often, but that is often the problem, that it is actually all is there, but it's not like communicated in the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, as you're saying, like when you submit to these higher tier journals or top tier journals, the editor is getting so many submissions past the desk that you have a very small amount of words and figures to be able to tell the story that you're trying to communicate. They're not going to read the whole thing before they desk reject you. Sadly.
Exactly. Yeah.
So just to sum up a little bit, what they're really kind of desk rejecting you about or looking at first is fit for the journal and timeliness. And then if you can get kind of past fit and timeliness, or in order to get past the fit and timeliness checks, you really need to be able to communicate your scientific story quickly and effectively in the writing itself. Or maybe too, like if you write a great abstract and your figures are great and in the correct order that you can see the story, then it's easier to get past the desk reject stage as well. Is that right?
That's right. I would say what's important for this like first stage
Yeah.
to not get desk rejected really is good title. It's not like even if you have a bad title, it's not like that a bad title and everything else is great will get you rejected. But if you talk to journal editors on like maybe conferences or stuff like that, just ask them how important the title is. And you'll probably hear them say that like a bad title can really annoy people. Like it's this funny thing where people get really annoyed by bad titles. So anyway, title, less important, but still it's easy to get right anyway. So, and then abstract, as you say, and then also introduction and discussion section.
Yeah.
So it's not the results section. It's basically anything but the results section. And this is where you tell the story. Like I always say, you have a narrative, like, or an argument in your results section, which is like, I call it your argument. So this is like the logical order in which you present your results. And that's kind of your mini story. But then all around that, there's like the big story, like the one that like gives the motivation for your research. And that really, really like showcases the significance and the timeliness and the novelty. This is what you do like in the big story or narrative. And they're having like a strong introduction section and a strong discussion section is like absolute key. And the cover letter as well. So that's, I think, another like thing that a lot of people like just underestimate the importance of. And they like then kind of copy paste stuff from their paper. And that's just like wasted space because you have like such an opportunity to like speak directly to that editor and like just be quite like frank and open with them. So one should really, really use that as well.
This is all so juicy. Okay. So one of the things that I was thinking was how it's very possible for people to get very advanced scientifically, right? Like they're doing their data, they're scientists and they're missing this part that you're talking about, right? Like, so I think a lot of scientists or, a lot of academics are going to be like, well, the most important thing is the data. And they approach their writing as a presentation of data. And what you're saying is, nope, you approach your writing as a story or a narrative. And as an argument, the data is supporting that argument and the data is playing a role in your story. But a scientific article is not simply, let me present you my data. Or good science writing and writing that's going to get past the desk reject is packaging that data inside of a narrative.
I think, that's so well put. I think that's exactly right. Like it's not a report. You're not just reporting your data. Or you can do that in some journals, but when you like want to really hit those, I mean, I know people don't like these like mention of impact factors, but unfortunately it's still like kind of what counts, right? Like, and most people still kind of want to get published in those journals with high impact factors. So in order to hit those, you need to tell a story. And the reason being that stories are just like, we are all humans, like reading the work, and stories are just like a really good tool for us to communicate things. And I always think like, it's so remarkable how much we like surround ourselves with stories. Like when we like read books, like watch TV, like I think almost everything we kind of do in our free time is like stories. So I think this just exemplifies so well how much we love them. And it's really the same. Like, and it's not like we switch this off because it's something, it's like hardwired in our brain. We can't switch it off when we read science. It will be so much easier for us to like understand and care about what we read when it's like written as a story. And that's the reason. And journal editors, they are like a particular kind of reader, but they're just a reader and they're just a human.
Right.
So
we forget this. Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it just makes it so much easier to communicate your research to everyone, like journal editor, peer reviewer, or like regular reader, whether they're in your field or outside your field. It just makes it, you're just doing your readers a favor, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, that's actually all it is. Like you need to spend some time trying to get your writing in order and tell that story so that they don't have to do the work.
Right. So it sounds to me like there are lots of different pieces. Like obviously there are lots of different pieces when you sit down to write the article, right? Because you have the abstract and you have the letter and you have the title and you have the data, you have the results, you have the intro. Like we've mentioned all these different kind of pieces that work together to present your scientific story. So talk to me a little bit about writing process. So what do you think the importance is of, or how do you recommend that academics find like a process that works for them so that they don't feel like they're like reinventing the wheel every time they sit down to write up their scientific work?
Yeah, that's really, really important to do, I think, to come up with a good process for yourself. And I see this again and again that researchers just, or like what happens a lot is that researchers procrastinate on their writing.
Yes.
And they can have many different reasons. And one of them is that they just don't know where to start and that it kind of feels like this daunting big task and they don't know where to start. And they have experienced the process being really inefficient. And I think it's like my pet peeve where like the way in many, many articles are written in a way where PhD students or the authors, the first author or the main writer of the article writes a draft and then they send this to their co-authors and then the co-authors go, oh, I think we should change the flow of the writing here. Or I think the story should be different. We should actually be telling this story. Now that I read this, I think the story we should tell is this and that. And then the person who's writing the article goes back and like rearranges stuff and like produces a second draft, and then that makes the rounds. And, you know, that takes always months, right? Until people have like read the thing and given their comments, etc. And then they're kind of trying all to agree on what the story should be. And then they are like making edits and like they're still kind of agreeing on the story and rearranging that. And then at the same time, they're also like kind of editing the sentences and like the phrases, like, oh, I don't like this word. I think we should have that word. Oh, you have a typo there. Oh, and you forgot a comma here. Like, you know, they're kind of doing everything at once. And then that just means like it takes a lot of time. And I think that's like how it is commonly done writing in academia, especially in the sciences. And it's just not efficient. So you just end up like either you procrastinate because you have made the experience that the process was like that, or you're like in the middle of the process and you're like, okay, I honestly think that most researchers spend too much time on their writing and that it could take a lot less time if they like had this system or process in place.
Right.
And I teach a very like specific process that I think works really well. That being said, I think the most important thing is to like have a system and then you like know what it should be and then you can like keep adapting it. But I think the system I'm teaching works pretty well and people seem to think it works pretty well as well. Yeah, I think the most important thing is probably to start with the story so that you don't start like immediately writing things, but you start deciding on a story.
And starting there. I think that's really, like you said, when we're teaching people about their writing process, we don't do kind of like the you know, how to actually put the article together type of coaching and teaching that you do. But we are often like saying like, what you need to figure out is you. Like you need to figure out like what is working for you and then continue to like replicate that and refine it and make it better and adjust. But a lot of times I do think it's in some ways it's easier to like start with somebody else's system and then start to tweak it and adapt it for yourself. So we've talked about trying to avoid desk reject by paying attention to story and what's really important, the different parts of the article that are really important. We've talked about having a process that a lot of times we feel frustrated and we avoid writing because we don't have a process. So now what I want to do is let the audience know that you and I are co-hosting a workshop coming up here soon, and we have the link in the show notes. So tell us about what people can learn from this workshop that we're going to be at together.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And I really hope that many of you join. So what I'm going to go over is I'm going to actually walk you through the system that I'm teaching kind of step by step. So I'm going to give you an overview of all the different steps and the order that I think will make the process efficient. So what I like about it is that it kind of teaches you the steps. So it makes you more time efficient, but also it ensures that your article is good, that your writing is good. Yes. So this is, I think, the beauty of the method is that these two things go so hand in hand, because while you're doing the work, going through the steps, you're making sure that your writing is clear, concise, compelling, and it takes less time to do that because you do it in a logical way. Yes. So we're going to go over that. And then also I'm going to talk about 3 very common mistakes that researchers make that kind of keeps them in this desk rejection zone or procrastination zone. And yeah, that's going to be the 2 main things we're going to talk about.
Well, I'm so excited. I'm really coming just as a co-hostess. I'll be there. I invite you all to come and hang out with Anna and I and learn some of these things. Right? I think that writing and publishing is so important. You wouldn't be listening to the podcast if it wasn't important to you. So it's worth taking some time to get some of this kind of take a step back. Instead of trying to figure it out yourself, look at how other people are doing it. Take some advice from somebody who's worked with a ton of science writers before. And I'm very excited. I hope you will all come to our special workshop presentation. All the information is in the show notes, so you can click through and sign up for that live workshop. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Anna.
Thank you. I also wanted to say that on the workshop, you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions. So if you have a question after listening to this, or if anything comes up while you're listening or watching the workshop, then there's going to be time for that as well. And yeah, it's been a pleasure being on. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Anna. Can't wait for our workshop.
Can't wait. Bye.
Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.